Hello everyone, and welcome to the Maybe Later Show. We obviously have a video idea and message to get across today, and it is indeed a very interesting one. However, before we get into the riveting meat of the video, you're gonna have to hold thine horses for just a moment and listen to our old man's tale. As with almost all American towns, the land that the Californian city of Irvine sits upon was traditionally inhabited by an indigenous group of people called the Gabrieleño people. As is to be expected, however, the European expeditioners soon arrived onto the land. The Spanish explorer Gaspar de Portola discovered the land in 1769, a revelation which led to the establishment of several small forts and homesteads. Cut to 1821, after Mexico had secured independence from Father Spain. The Mexican government seized control of the land and offered money to those who claimed it first. The three largest of these land concessions, and the three most important for our narrative purposes, were Rancho Santiago de Santa Ana, Rancho San Joaquin, and Rancho Lomas de Santiago. In 1864, the owner of Rancho San Joaquin, called Jose Sepulveda, sold a total of 50,000 acres of his land to Benjamin and Thomas Flint, Llewellyn Bixby, and James Irvine. In 1866, Flint, Bixby, and Irvine purchased another large piece of land, this time from Rancho Lomas de Santiago. In the 1860s, after a chaotic Mexican-American war, the land of Rancho No. 3 became disputed. It was eventually decided that this land should be split between the Flints, Llewellyn Bixby, and James Irvine. I would like to take a moment to pause this story and acknowledge this Llewellyn Bixby character, who, as far as I know, was purchasing this land herself of her volition as a woman in the 1800s, and while there certainly is debate to be had as to whether it was being sold to her ethically, it is still quite an impressive feat for a woman to have pulled that off in Victorian-era Mexico. Well done, Llewellyn Bixby. By 1878, the wonderful business mogul who we all know and love as James Irvine purchased all his partner's land for about $4.5 million in modern US currency. 8 years later, James Irvine passed away, and all 110,000 acres of his land were given to his son, also called James Irvine. James Irvine II founded the Irvine Company, which by 1918 was composed of a flourishing 60,000 acres of lima beans. Everyone thought this was a very impressive feat, and soon various train stations and towns and post offices began propping up named after the Irvine Company. The Irvine Company had gained so much control over this stretch of California desert that by World War II, the US government approached the Irvines and asked to purchase pieces of their land for use by the Marine Corps. In 1947, James Irvine II died and passed the company on to his son Myford. Myford had the bright idea to let any old person establish homesteads on the land owned by the Irvine Company, but passed away before any of his grand plans could come to fruition. Luckily, in 1959, the same year Myford died, the University of California approached the Irvine Company and asked for 1,000 acres of land upon which to build a new university campus. The Irvine Company was happy to provide and sold the land to the university for $1. The university's consulting architect, a man called William Pereira, began working alongside the Irvine Company planners to create a master plan for a city of 50,000 people to be built on the 1,000 acres of land they had been given. The first phases of this grand endeavor were completed by 1970, and in December of 1971, residents of this new city of Irvine voted to make the city substantially larger than the one envisioned by the Pereira plan. By January of 1999, the population of Irvine was almost triple what had originally been intended. In the late 90s and early 2000s, residents of nearby city Newport Beach began championing for the replacement of John Wayne Airport. Their suggested location for a new airport was the now defunct El Toro Marine Corps Air Station. Evidently, the residents of Irvine did not appreciate this idea, so they annexed the air station in 2003 to prevent the new airport from being built and turn this land into a park. And everything about this whole Irvine story just sounds so ridiculous, right? It's not often that you hear about 19th century girl bosses selling their hundreds of acres of land to impossibly wealthy lima bean farmers, or cities being created just for city's sake on land purchased for $1, or of cities annexing other cities' property. Despite all of these bizarre factors, Irvine, California is still very much a city that exists today. It has a population of 300,000 people, and the Irvine Company still exercises a massive amount of control over them even all those years later. But Irvine is far from the only strange planned city in the world, or even in just the US. I'm sure you've heard of the various governments across the globe constructing new capital cities, bankrupting their citizens with golden palaces and silver streets, or else entire settlements being uprooted in order to escape harsh weather patterns. There are these, and then there are also other Irvine-like stories of entire cities being completely planned under odd conditions. For an example of an overly expensive new capital city, we turn to the city of Wadian, or Masr, or Kemet, or Al-Salam, or Al-Mustaqbal, or how about we just call it the new administrative capital, NAC for short. Since 2015, the Egyptian government has been at work building a new urban creation, located 45 kilometers to the east of the current capital and the largest city, Cairo. The area reserved for the new administrative capital sits at around 725 square kilometers at an important midway point between Cairo and the key Middle East port of Suez. Like any good large-scale building project, the new city comes with its fair share of controversy. Critics have said that too many resources are diverted to the NAC and have noted the towering expenses of the project. In the city itself, the planning features the government district, a cultural district, diplomatic quarter, 21 residential areas, and an airport. A tower has been constructed already that is 385 meters high, which makes it the tallest in Africa. Through the center will be a large park known as Green River Park, and additionally, a Cairo monorail will be built as the main transit link to the central Egyptian metro. As of now, 100,000 housing units have been built, and there are tens of thousands of government employees commuting into the area. The Egypt government hopes to have NAC serve as an area for the quickly growing national population to exist away from the mega-urban chaos of Cairo. Of course, congestion and overpopulation aren't the only reasons a country might want to relocate its capital. In Indonesia's case, their former capital city Jakarta is literally sinking into the ocean as we speak. In 2019, Indonesia's President Joko Widodo, whose time as president was characterized by various controversial, ambitious infrastructure projects, announced that the Indonesian government would be constructing a new capital to address the sinking problem afflicting Jakarta. Of course, COVID being what it was, construction on this new capital, called Nusantara, didn't actually begin until 2022. Nusantara has long been held up to be some sort of new, green, carbon-free city with pure, clean air, a much-needed improvement to the situation in Jakarta. It's also been advertised as a very high-tech city, attractive to crypto bros who were promised the ability to purchase apartments and housing with cryptocurrency. All of this promising-sounding city infrastructure could only be built, however, after hundreds of acres of Borneo jungle were bulldozed. This was, of course, a very controversial action, but despite outcry from Borneo residents, the project marched on. By the 17th of August 2024, Indonesia's Independence Day and the day Nusantara was scheduled to be inaugurated, the new city was still in relatively uncertain condition. Lots of important infrastructure was unfinished or non-existent, partially due to the constant construction delays that had plagued the project since the beginning. And despite Widodo's attempts to make the city look attractive to foreign investors, the project was also suffering financially. The initial guest list to the inauguration was cut from 8,000 people to just 1,000 due to a lack of facilities in the unfinished city. The inauguration took place alright, but few government operations have moved to Nusantara, and at this point, President Widodo's term has ended, and the new president, Prabowo Subianto, while having expressed interest in the Nusantara project, has not actually made much substantial progress on the city. As of now, the whole thing remains an unfinished financial disaster of a project that Indonesian citizens have been quick to criticize, and at the current rate, it isn't set to be done with until the mid-2040s. Despite how we've made it sound, though, planned capital cities don't always smolder into financially ruinous bureaucracy hell. In the country/continent/island of Australia, the capital city Canberra, population now about 470,000, began as an entirely planned project to settle a dispute between the dominant Australian cities of Sydney and Melbourne. Following the establishment of the Commonwealth in 1901, it was decided that in order to not place favourites, the capital should have a new city founded for it within New South Wales, at a midway point between Sydney and Melbourne. The place began construction in 1913 and has had many decades of building, renovating, and improving since then. Finally, another common reason planned cities come into being is through various religious movements. The most famous of these is obviously the creation of Salt Lake City in the American state of Utah by Mormon settlers escaping persecution from the American Midwest. Salt Lake City was planned meticulously from the very beginning, and this planning is part of the reason it is such a successful city today. However, various other Mormon-like religious movements also tried to establish planned settlements across America. One such religious movement was the very culty-sounding Harmony Society. In 1785, a man called Johann Georg Rapp founded a religious sect called the Harmony Society. The group was originally based in Germany, and by the 1790s, Rapp had gained almost 12,000 followers, which worried the German government for a variety of reasons, and so they began persecuting the Harmonists. This, combined with the fact that the Lutheran Church had already banned the Harmony Society from meeting, caused the Harmony Society to relocate to the United States at the turn of the 19th century. The Harmonists established many towns in the United States, all of which still exist in some capacity today. When they first arrived, they created the town of Harmony, Pennsylvania, which at its peak had a population of around 800. There were lots of problems with the town of Harmony, however, and they only got worse as time went on. Firstly, sex was discouraged by Father Rapp, which meant most new Harmonists were foreign immigrants who needed a lot more land than newborn babies did. Harmony very quickly ran out of space for all its inhabitants, making it difficult to get around. Secondly, the suboptimal climate of the area made it difficult to grow enough grapes to produce wine for the whole town, which was evidently an important part of Harmonist culture. Finally, the population of the entire area was growing quickly, and the Harmonists often had spats with their non-harmonious neighbors. So in 1814, Father Rapp and the Harmonists got up and left, heading for Indiana. The second settlement was also called Harmony, although it's now called New Harmony for disambiguation purposes. New Harmony became a very successful economic hub for the Harmonists, but eventually they ran into the same problem they had in the original Harmony: unfortunate neighbors. This time they were Kentucky slaveholders a mere 15 miles away, and because the Harmonists didn't like the practice of slavery, they eventually got up and left back towards Pennsylvania, selling their land for $150,000. Third and final Harmonist-built settlement was called Economy, and ended up being the site of productive manufacturing and business for the Harmonists until the society disbanded in 1905. With all of those planned cities mentioned, I think it's about time to wrap up the video. From my count, it's been exactly 600 days since the last real video, so it's time to get a move on. Thank you very much for watching this video. As always, sources, music, and show notes are all in the description, so if you're interested in any further reading, there's plenty there. That's all from us. We'll see you in another 600 days.